So I want to ask a question about creationists and how they've sort of changed over the past 200 years, because it used to be that faith was
You
something
mean
that
how they've evolved?
how they've evolved, yes, but culturally, not biologically. So it used to be that faith was defined as something that was beyond all reason, and now modern creationists have sort of hijacked the meaning of science to mean something that's going to hold up faith. So now instead of science being the work of the devil, now science has to confirm faith. It has to confirm the Bible, and it always will. And that itself is a statement of faith. The fact that the Bible will always uphold science, or science will always confirm the Bible, that is a statement of faith, not a statement of science. And if you start with the presupposition that the Bible is true and that science will show that the Bible is true, that's not a scientific approach. But they have convinced themselves that science is the tool with, the whole creation science evangelism thing.
If I could have one central idea come out of most of my work, it's that apologetics is the exact opposite of science. And I don't mean just generally they're incompatible, but they're exactly the same process, but done the wrong direction. So apologetics means starting with the Bible, the infallible, inalterable source, and then it tries to find the facts which will support that.
Exactly. It's the opposite of science.
It's exactly the opposite. And that's why you're never going to see a Christian apologist stumble on anything useful. Because they're not only not compatible with that exploration, but they are strictly opposed to it. They're actually undoing science through the process of apologetics. Now, that doesn't mean every Christian is unable to comprehend science. It means that the process by which Christian apologetics works is exactly the opposite. It is truly, fundamentally incompatible with good science, the scientific method in general.
Yeah, and that's what they're opposed to, is scientific methodology. I mean, everything that science is based on and the whole way in which science works, the reason that science works, the creationists are arguing the direct opposite of every aspect of that. They don't want to have evidence to indicate the conclusion, for example. They want a conclusion, and then they'll find evidence to match that. They will assert things that are not evidently true, and they assert things for no reason, and they want to be able to espouse whatever the hell they believe as though it's a matter of fact simply because they believe it. They don't want to go with peer review. They want to go to the opposite of peer review. They want to believe in subjective interpretation, where we understand that eyewitness testimony is the least reliable form of testimony. And if you have eyewitness testimony, then you still have to have corroborative evidence to support that. They insist that hearsay document is eyewitness testimony, and that it is the ultimate evidence and requires no other evidence. So anything that aligns with them is taken in as supportive, and anything that isn't is openly ignored, because everything is running on a bias and a double standard. And it's just like Concordance said, the psychology of creationism, and in some degrees extreme theism in general, is directly opposite of anything that science is. And the reason that science can focus in on the truth of any matter is the exact reason why religion shards off into thousands of different denominations going off in different directions, each one claiming that particular one is the absolute truth, until you get a new heretic who says, no, this is the absolute truth, and then it shards off again.
And this is why I don't really oppose religion. I only oppose religious apologetics. And that's specifically why, because they make metaphysical claims on the basis of dogma rather than really seeing the universe how it is. The other aspects of religion, it's not that I'm in favor of them. It's just that I don't feel like opposing them. It doesn't seem like the best use of my resource. I'm sorry, Thunder.
Yeah, if you think about it, if you claim to have absolute knowledge about something and that is your ultimate truth that can never be changed, then you've automatically defined the limits of that methodology. Whereas science is exactly the opposite. It has no limits or boundaries. Right? So dogma is fundamentally limited. Essentially, if you go with what a lot of these fundamental Christians say. It's fundamentally limited to a 2,000-year-old book written essentially by goat herders, whereas science has essentially limitless potential.
My point is that I think they've changed over the past couple hundred years. They used to sort of distance themselves from science, and now they've attempted to hijack it as confirming their apologetics. And I just wanted to ask you how you think this. They've forgotten about the actual definition of faith. They've now turned faith into something scientific, or they've attempted to, and they've actually twisted it into when it's actually just faith. But why do you think they changed, and how did they change? Is what I'm asking.
One of the first things that comes up in every debate that I have with these people is they always want to redefine faith. And, the word faith appears in the dictionary in two contexts, and they're unrelated to each other and quite different. You have one that is a secure confidence, and then you have another one which is a belief that is assumed without reason. Now, they know, and the girl that was on at the beginning of the show had already expressed that that's the way they actually believe. It's not based on evidence. It's not based on reason. It is an assertion that is assumed because they want to, because they make up reasons why they want to believe what they want to believe, but they just want to believe what they want to believe, and that's it. And that's the only reason that they've got behind them, but that's not going to compel people. So you have these other people who try to mix the two contexts, and then they try to assume the conclusion as if that's evidence, and since that's not going to cut it, then they have to do these apologetics where they have to come up with arguments that sound scientific, like when they come up with baraminology, trying to figure out why everything seems to be.
Well, that was drastic.
Life forms seem to be classified in that they are. What was drastic?
You suddenly cut off in mid-sentence, but you're back with us now.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, obviously, I didn't hear
you
that.
just left us all hanging for a bit there.
Yeah, well, sorry.
That was a dramatic pause.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe
yes,
there's.
I think you're right. I mean, and what frustrates me is that when I see the creationists attempt to use science, and why they've started to do it, I'm not entirely sure. It's abundantly clear that they have very little understanding of what they're talking about. I mean, whether you go back to Kent Hovind or his parrot, Venomfang X, the amount of scientific disinformation that they came out with was quite horrific. And it also seems contrary to the fact that science is filling in so many gaps that the amount of space that they've got to squeeze in their God seems to get less and less. But I don't know whether anyone can expand on this. I understand that recently William Lane Craig has talked about Einstein, and I think has either challenged him to...
He's been doing that for years, DPR.
What's he up to with Einstein?
Oh, he's got an alternative theory to relativity. And basically, relativity says that there are no fixed frames of reference, and William Lane Craig says, yeah, there is one, and it's basically God. So Einstein was wrong. There is a fixed frame of reference.
Several times these people have made an admission to the effect that if you don't believe X, then there are consequences for not believing. And whereas, of course, the scientific position doesn't have that, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you believe or not. The only thing that we would care about is why would you believe if you believe? Because we want to, if you have a reason for your belief, then it's going to be the same thing that is going to compel us, and you should be able to demonstrate that. And it's a way of improving your understanding. And the fundamental difference between these two perspectives is that science is a way of improving understanding, and religion is not. Religion simply assumes that you know more than anyone else can know, that you have some tap into all knowledge, and that it doesn't really matter if you knew anything at all, because it's all very personal. It's all some undefined plan for your life, and that's all that it really is. But it's not going to get anywhere as far as progress. What's laughable for me is when I read creationists arguing with each other. I was reading an article where Ken Ham is arguing with Kent Hovind about the basking shark that was a that Kent Hovind said was a plesiosaur. They're arguing back and forth on scientific data, and it's amusing because the article was something maintaining creationist credibility, and just the title alone already tells you how amusing the article is, because neither side of this conversation gives a damn about truth or accuracy or scientific data. They're just trying to maintain their own income, their own multi-million-dollar empires of lying to people. That's all that matters to them.
And I would say that it's worse than that. You can actually quantify this to a fairly reasonable degree, in that technology is usually the application of scientific knowledge, the practical implementation of scientific knowledge, and those are usually protected by patents. So patents gives you a fairly direct measure of how applicable some knowledge is. It gives you a measure of how good methodologies are at actually discovering new stuff, particularly new stuff that's useful. And one thing that you'll notice is there really aren't that many churches that are funded by patents.
One of the classic examples, I think, of where creationists totally fail at science is when they use the expression kinds. We had Venom Fang X on the show 18 months or so ago, and he was asked or challenged Aaron about this, about how many, Aaron's question was, how many kinds of cat did Noah take on the ark? And after the best part of about 20 minutes, the best that Venom Fang X could come up with was to say that he knew that his domestic cat wasn't related to the big cats like the lions, and there were some little cats as well, and these were different kinds. This is, I kid you not, you can go back and watch it. This is how wonderfully scientific his definition was. So after that program, I made a video, and I know he got it because I sent it to him, and I showed him two cat-like things and asked him to tell me whether they were of the same kind or not, and what tests could be done to determine this. Of course, he never got back to me, nor will any creationist get back to you, because they cannot define kinds. It's a nonsensical definition, and this is why I don't understand why they try and use science, because they embarrass themselves so much when they do try.
Again, it's a matter. The original question, though, the question was, how have they changed tactics? How are they adopting science? I actually don't think that there have been any changes in the way that apologetics work. I think what you're probably picking up on is the fact that the apologetics are now more all-encompassing. They're cherry-picking from a broader list of sources. Theology used to be strictly, the apologetics game used to be strictly a matter of these sort of untestable, unprovable philosophical concepts like free will or omnibenevolence. Can God make a rock so big even he can't lift? Those kinds of questions used to be where apologetics would find the most productive value. Nowadays, because philosophy is, I think, on the wane, it's not as much in the public eye, science is the avenue that the apologetics are going to cherry pick. They're going to find those facts within science that they find the most confirmatory and reframe them in whatever way they think is best for their viewpoint. But I don't think there's anything new about that. And I think if you go back as far as St. Augustine of Hippo, you look at the writings there, he was, if you will, doing the apologetics from the Greek, from the traditional Greek ideas of classical forms. And he incorporated a lot of those ideas and cherry-picked from them to support the Bible. And he's probably the most scientific religious writer of his time.
And of course, what we hear now is the fine-tuning argument, which is really no different, is it, to the Paley's watch argument, that there had to be a designer because nothing would work so wonderfully if there wasn't.
And
they come up with odds about what is the probability of the constants of nature being as they are that are so suitable for creating life. And there's a couple of things. I'm going to come back to Thunder on this because he knows more about this and how ridiculous it is to pick these or say that there is any sort of probability about this. It just doesn't make sense. But look what's out there. Look at the billions of galaxies. and all the empty space, and all the places where life cannot exist. And look where it can, so far as we know at the moment, on the crust of an average planet orbiting an average star in an average solar system. It's hardly fine-tuning. Thunder, I know that you had an issue, you did a video on the idea that they can come up with possibilities.
Several. The most obvious one is that actually assigning probabilities to events that you don't know how probable they are is it's an exercise in time wasting. It would be like saying, what's the probability of sex? And then trying to calculate the probability of a sex. Well, unless you actually know that you're rolling a dice, or whether that dice has all sixes on every face, there are a whole horde of things that could affect this calculation. Until you actually have a mechanism, unless you actually have an idea of all the factors that can affect the outcome, putting a probability to it is pointless. My God, Aaron, that's is that a snake?
Yeah, I'm
not that hot.
Python.
There's another strategy.
Go.
Sorry,
Let's go back first to Zach and then to concordance.
Okay, so there's another strategy that I've seen a creationist try to pull once for denying the credibility of this quote-unquote atheist point of view towards the history of the universe, which is to say that basically a statement doesn't have scientific. It's not a scientific statement unless it's used in some form of modern technology. So evolution is basically a faith position because it deals with the past because we weren't there, sort of. And so they're basically saying it's just another faith position, just like creationism.
Have you noticed how they always want to equate science with a faith position or with a religion whenever there's an aspect of faith or religion that is obviously recognizably bad? Okay, that's when they want to put. That's when they want to put it on us. Hold on, I got a perfect illustration for this. They always want to take testimony because that's what they want to believe, and they're just going to want to believe that, and they're not going to let anything else dissuade that. So they're going to make the assumption, they're going to drink their Kool-Aid, they're going to buy the farm, in this case, and they're not going to accept any evidence that goes against it. They're not interested in reality, they're not interested in truth. Testimony, we know, is the worst kind of evidence that there is, and here's a demonstration of that anybody ought to be able to see. You go to a small island, you post a guard on this island, you both have matching boots on, and you have him post, this is your land, he's on the beach, he's supposed to watch the beach, make sure nobody comes over here, right? You trust this guy, longtime friend, whatever. Now you come back to him the next morning, and he swears that no one has walked on this beach, he's guarded, he's been on his post, he's been reliable, and yet there is a pair of shoe prints that doesn't match either of your shoes walking across the beach right in front of him. Now, what do you believe? Do you believe the testimony, or do you believe the evidence? Now,
can I broaden this discussion a little?
1 second. It's important to realize that nobody saw any evidence, yet we know, without any eyewitness, that somebody was there.
So let me broaden this a little bit, because the religious apologetics are not the only kind of apologetics.
The shoe prints could be there on their own. I thought it could occur naturally, the shoe footprints, because you don't believe in intelligent design.
Can I briefly put in a bit here, concordance? Yeah, I mean, if I was actually confronted with that sort of argument that evolution has no technological applications, I would just go straight to the actual technological applications, which is basically in dealing with genetic populations, particularly viruses. Not virus. Viruses and what are the antibiotics with bacteria. These are two areas where evolution is crucially important. If you come across a new bacteria, the first thing you want to do is trace its genetic heritage. And once you establish these baseline, these rules in the present, all you're really doing is extrapolating it into the past. In the same way that you would say that, you believe that the Earth, not believe, that the most sensible model is that the Earth was orbiting the Sun 50,000 years ago, even though that we've got no measurements of it. Right? Just because we don't have measurements of it, that we have a robust model in the present, and that we have no sensible reasons for believing that it was different in the past.
Well, we have all these esoteric uses for evolutionary models to explain our understanding of human genomics, or genomics in general. If you want to find a regulatory sequence, as you were talking about earlier, what you do is you grab 1,000 people and you look for where mutations do not occur. Or you look across very closely related organisms, find those sequences which are highly conserved. Now, there's no reason to predict that if these organisms were created independently of each other, that somehow they were designed for a purpose, that they would necessarily recycle the same information with the same defects, with the same mistakes, with the same thumbprints on them. But in fact, that's what we see. So the evolutionary model is much, much more productive in terms of genomic understanding. And there are a number of esoteric applications where we can calculate specific numbers which tell us what must have happened in the past. That have guided our understanding of genomic medicine, personalized medicine, pharmacogenomics, and a number of other applications within evolution, most especially, though, within things like population structures, population genetics, conservation biology. If you want to know whether or not an animal is truly endangered, you have to understand the nature of evolutionary change within their genome. But I want to go back to something that we were talking about earlier, which is just generally apologetics. There are more apologetics than just religious apologetics. There are, for example, Nazi apologists, or Holocaust apologists, or slavery apologists, or racial violence apologists, people who are looking for any excuse to justify a position that they have decided on in advance. And if you broaden that, you begin to see the psychological mechanisms involved. And the most important one is confirmation bias. We recognize that a fact is valid because it meets our pre-decided criteria. Aha, this validates why it is that more black people are in jail. This validates the fact that the Holocaust never happened. And in any kind of denialism, whether it's evolution denialism, which is what we call creationism, or it's HIV denialism, there's this cherry picking that goes along with a confirmation bias. When we recognize some fact as being useful to our preconceived agenda, then we latch onto it and we expand upon it and we build a case upon it. But it's not the scientific method. Now, you're asking about whether or not science is truly faith, and the short answer is that it's peer review. It is the competitive nature and the lack of dogma in science that prevents it from being capable of forming these kinds of apologia or apologetics that we see in so many other areas. We can't afford to have dogma. We can't afford to have illusions. We can't even afford to have a very strong agenda because there's someone else out there. Now, we're humans, so we certainly have these kinds of things, but we can't afford them in the sense that if I advance an agenda, I get labeled as a bad scientist. Clearly, this person is allowing their own bias to affect the interpretation of the data or the collection of the data. And that makes you a fraud in scientific circles. On the other hand, if you're Ken Ham and you say, put on your biblical glasses, or if you're a Nazi apologist and you say, well, the Nazis really weren't so bad, here's why, that's perfectly acceptable. So I even find that within historical or social context, that you see the same kind of religious apologetics, and you can synthesize that all together into a generalized principle of people who have obviously decided in advance what position they're going to support. It is the opposite of the skeptical method. The scientific method being specifically for science, the skeptical method being the process by which we ruthlessly examine our own positions for confirmation bias, for attempts to delude ourselves into believing something which we cherish or want to be true. I'll end there.
Yeah, I want to add
Can I ask you a related question?
Well, let Aaron just make his comment.
No. Let him go.
Okay, Zach, we'll go straight back to
you
you.
can go first. You can go first.
Well, he doesn't want to. He's offering you the opportunity.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to basically ask a question that's not really answerable, but I thought it would be interesting to think about. I was watching a discussion that Richard Dawkins was having on some show with, I think, yeah, he was on some talk show, and he basically said that there are some things in science that you can know for certain that won't change. It's sort of Ray Comfort likes to basically diss science by saying that we've changed the date of the age of the Earth from 1 million years to 1 billion years, and how do we know that it won't change in the future? How do we know that it won't be 2 trillion years in 100 years? How do we know that anything in science is actually true if science is constantly changing? So I just want to ask you.
Well, firstly, I'm going to go to Thunder first. Well, no, I'm going to go to you, Aaron, because you wanted to say something before. But please, Zach,
no, I'm not saying
you have to understand there is a difference between just random change and refining. Aaron,
right,
that's what I'm saying.
The kind of change that science makes is it's constantly getting more accurate. It doesn't suddenly shard off and go the wrong direction ever. It's like a game of 20 questions. You're always zooming in closer, getting a more refined version of the answer. And like I said, religion shards off in different directions. And it's like playing 20 assumptions. You're never going to get there. You're never going to be able to verify that anything you believe is actually true. And the reason is because philosophy may have some variable interpretation of what the word truth means, but in science it really boils down to that truth is essentially fact, and it's just whatever we can show to be true. And with that definition, there is no truth in religion. Go ahead.
I mean, for me, come. You ever go first?
Okay, so it is. I agree with you that science is like a sort of like a hyperbola that slowly reaches an asymptote. It never just shoots off in another direction. That's true, but I just wanted to, how do you know what exactly? How do you know that, for example, the Earth is round? For example, how do you know that knowledge will never change?
We don't.
Well,
it's provisional.
yeah,
all knowledge in
absolutely.
science is provisional and subject to falsification. That, if you want to read the work of Karl Popper, will explain the opposite of what was what confirmationism, the idea that we could know anything for sure. Instead, we have, and this is a phrase I'm going to steal from Thunder, we have models of predictive utility. We have useful ideas which are explanatory, and they're only as valuable to us so long as they explain all of the phenomena we observe. So, for example, if something new comes out, that maybe the shape of space is somehow different, and in fact the Earth is a cube, you won't find most scientists fighting against it. Now, they will not go gently into that good night. They will ask a lot of questions. They will demand a very high standard of proof, depending on the level of upset that new theory brings in. The same thing is true in biology. There are a number of really radical ideas in biology that are still being assessed. And they do represent paradigm shifts and things that we never really thought of before. And we're always open to that. And we're always open to that because the last guy to get it isn't getting the grants, isn't getting the prestige, isn't going to move with the times. So what you'll find, though, is, and I'd highly recommend, I'm going to plug my own video on this, but there's an essay that I read by Isaac Asimov called The Relativity of Wrong. And what it's talking about is that science very rarely overturns entire models. What they do is they refine something. And the reason why they rarely overturn something is that the model has been sufficiently explanatory for such a long time that there's a very good chance that it's still a viable model. So to say that, for example, Newtonian mechanics were overturned by Einstein's relativity. It isn't exactly true. It was a very profound refinement. There were some pretty subtle things that had to be added. But for the most part, Newtonian relativity was pretty accurate. The Earth, from our point of view, based on the instruments we have at the time, was more or less flat. I mean, the deviation from flat is pretty doggone small. But as our instruments became more precise... Go ahead, Thunder.
This is the crazy thing. I mean, most people in your day-to-day lives do not think of yourselves as living on the surface of a sphere. You look out and you see a two-dimensional landscape. Very few people actually see the Earth curling away under their feet. And they live on the planet for their whole lives, and I would reckon that probably 1 in 10 know which way it's spinning.
Yeah, I'd like to throw something on that too. I've met a couple of people for whom it seems a psychological impossibility to envision their position on a map. And I don't understand what goes on in these other people's heads. But I know... I always imagine where I am on the globe. I mean, it would be disorienting for me to not know what states or what, not to know the surrounding geography and my place on it. And there are other people who do everything by a two-dimensional scale of landmarks to let them know if they're going in the right direction. And they have no concept. If you show them a map and say, you are here, they don't get that, and they can't use that map because they can't think in that abstract. I don't know how that is, but that might be part of the problem that we're having here. By the way, I want to plug my own video too. The fourth foundational falsehood of creationism talks about what Concordance was saying about how science and religion act exactly opposite of each other, and that if science were to employ any of the traits that religion uses, it would result in those scientists being declared frauds. But when we have what we reveal as a lying scientist would be a revealed truth in religion, so it's completely opposite. All right, I'm done.
I would just like to add one brief point, and another way of looking at this is that science is the descriptors of reality, and as such, it is plastic to reality. So the greater the understanding you have of reality, the better science models it. And as Concordance pointed out earlier, the metric that we use to assess how good our models of reality are is, can we actually get predictive utility out of them?
Yeah, who is it? Who was the Greek philosopher that says all knowledge starts with the knowledge that we know nothing? Or is it Plato? I think it's Plato.
I thought it was Socrates. But it's Plato speaking for Socrates. Yeah, it's Plato speaking for Socrates.
But that really is something you have to learn to embrace in science. And that is that we can never actually shrink ourselves down and see what's going on. So we're using inference in a number of situations. I can never see the inner contents of a cell. That's just not how it works. I will never see, the exact sequence of a piece. Well, actually, I might someday. But I'll be looking at a micrograph. I'll be looking at, dots of ink on a piece of paper because I can't get down there. I can find a number of methods which only make sense if. But there are a number of assumptions that go into that. Looking through a microscope, right? I'm magnifying the light, but I'm not looking at the true object. I'm looking at an image. And that is where I find value in philosophy is at least that basic statement is you have to give up a belief in a concrete reality. You have to give up thinking that there's value in knowing one thing for sure. Because there is no value in that. Because it's always those assumptions, those things that we think we know, which hold us back from the true discovery of questioning absolutely everything, even the nature of reality. And I think that the kind of question that you're describing, if I'm understanding this right, Zach, is the kind of sneering question of, what is it you guys think you even really know? Well, the answer is nothing, and I'm very proud of that. There's nothing that I know 100% for sure, because everything I know is subject to revision if reality shows to me a different image. If my inferences are somehow steering me a different way, I'm open to that. I don't bog myself down with assumptions.
I have to take a philosophical point of opposition here. While there are those who philosophize that we can't tell if this is a computer-enhanced hallucination like in The Matrix, the fact remains that reality, the rules of reality still apply to us, whether this is a video game reality or not. So within the confines of this reality, reality is still real for us. And with these rules applied, we are still able to know for certain, for example, that there was never a global flood and that the Tower of Babel is not the way that the Bible pointed it out to be. There are things we know for certain, even if we can't say for absolutely certain that reality is real beyond the reality that we know.
I would just actually add a little philosophical point to what Gordon was saying, is that you were saying that you'll never actually get down and actually see the sequence of the base pairs or things like this. I think in many ways that's the way that you actually, that's the position that you are with all of reality. That you only, when you say that you see things, in reality all you're doing is seeing photons that originated from that object. The only difference is that your mind is actually doing the processing on those photons to recreate the reality. So in that sense, you can see these invisible objects in the way that you can actually perceive the rest of the world. Does that make sense?
Very true. Very true. Yeah, we create models in our minds rather than actually directly perceiving the object in quote-unquote reality. But I can embrace that. I feel quite comfortable with that. That's all.
Okay. Is it possible to disprove idealism?
Define idealism.
The belief that basically everything is perception, so without mind, reality doesn't really exist. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no scientific laws. It just means that those scientific laws are ultimately laws about consciousness and so control is just another subset of those laws, which is very limited. So we have no control over reality.
So you've shifted a bit. Just start again. You're saying that idealism is the ability to prove something without a mind.
No, it's just the belief that the only thing that exists is consciousness, basically. Like that there are no such thing as other objects.
Might be true.
Yeah, that's the global skeptic position. It's unproductive.
It's not a very
I'll say
useful
that, Zach.
position. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And
the reason that it's...
yes, in practice, no.
Yeah. And the reason is, as I said, because there are still rules that apply to us, and so reality is still real, even if it isn't.
But couldn't reality just be a set of laws that affect our conscious experience? Even
if, as I said, if this is just a video game, we're still subject to those rules.
Sure, but I'm just saying that idealism isn't. It's not mutually exclusive with idealism that there are rules.
This is the thing. Why do you actually try to work out what's happening? Why are you actually trying to work out anything about reality at all? And if you actually sit down and think about it, you'll work out it's because you care about what happens in the future. This is why you're trying to create models of reality. And this is where the whole endeavor of actually science springs from, is it allows you to predict what things will be like in the future.
Right.
I mean, otherwise, why would you care whether solipsism is true or not true? Why would you actually bother asking questions unless you actually cared what's going to happen in the future, unless you were trying to actually create models about reality?
Well, I mean, those models that describe the functioning of reality could be models that describe the way consciousness works for humans. So you could, for example, the laws of chemistry govern the way, well, first of all, the way that objects work in nature, but that has to do with the way that. What I'm saying is, unless, obviously there are things that exist in reality that are beyond our everyday experience,
Sorry, I thought you were questioning whether we could actually know that for certain.
We can't.
Well, I mean, what is your position? Do you think that we can know that or can't know that?
I think we can't know that.
We can't know that. So why are you basing a question on a proposition that you don't believe?
Yeah, because you may well just be dreaming that there are things that are beyond our conception.
Well, I think that conception would, in that picture, conception, or in my picture, conception would just be a subset of reality, a subset of conscious reality.
The way that I would view this is that seeing as we are trying to work out what happens in the future, there are successful methods for doing this and unsuccessful methods for doing this. And one of the actual things that is an unsuccessful method is to actually propose solutions that either cannot be resolved or require more variables to resolve than you actually had to begin with. Yeah, it's this sort of Occam's razor type thing. The thing about proposing these questions which you can never resolve is they don't actually help you any. They don't actually increase your knowledge of the universe, and they have no predictive capability. And everything else that every other line of reasoning you have access to will say that engaging in these sorts of problems is just a waste of time. You've got better things to do.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that it's a tautology, basically. So it's not resolvable because tautologies are not falsifiable because tautologies are just true, basically.
Well, tautologies are tautologies.
I don't. It doesn't. I think. Well, I think that this kind of philosophical wandering is sort of fun, even if it's completely useless.
Yeah,
so,
well, it is completely useless, and that's why I've said so many times that I have no interest in philosophy.
Well, not everything has to be useful.
Okay. I'll grant. I'm sure there's something in some aspect of my life that isn't useful or that I like for non-useful reasons. Sure. But there's no
Zach,
practical goal.
allow me to ask you a question, Zach. The likes of William Lane Craig, a professional philosopher, seeks to use philosophy to prove or argue into existence things such as God. Do you think that philosophy can be used in that way?
If it comes to...
Let me be specific. Do you think philosophy can argue into existence anything?
No, I don't think so.
What do you think of William Lane Craig's attempts to do so?
His attempts to do so are... Well, I mean, if you want to prove something, that something exists in the universe, you have to have a good scientific reason to believe it. You can't just, hand-wavingly, just come up with some logical argument that such and such a being must exist based on my assumptions. It doesn't work that way. But I think the whole thing with the tautology of solipsism or idealism, it's a little different than that, because I'm not wishing anything into being by making an idealistic claim, really. It's more that I'm just... I don't know exactly how to explain it, because it is a tautology, but it doesn't really matter also. But it's fun to think about.
It's been in the public eye because of certain media, and I think that people are intrigued by the idea of reality not being reality or not being real. Things like The Matrix, right? That was a classic one, and I remember going into it and thinking, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was coming. But there are a number of other sci-fi type movies where people are hooked up to virtual realities, to simulated realities, or the holodeck was one that always was very intriguing. They had multiple episodes where they'd use the holodeck as a framing device for people not truly knowing what was real. But the thing about the holodeck is there was always that point where you could say, arch, and the arch would come out and you'd walk out the doors. But then how did you know you were walking into the real Enterprise?
Okay, can we all do this together? 1, 2, 3.
Arch.
Arch.
Oh, mine showed up.
Yeah, mine's on the fritz again. But everyone else doesn't even know how to get out. At least we know how to get out. Clap your hands together and say arch.
Some of us don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about, Spender.
Well, if you're not a nerd, you shouldn't be on the show.
Okay.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
Well, I'm proud to be the non-nerd here.
But I
Zach,
think
unless
people are
there's-
fascinated by the question. You know, are we the dream or the dreamer?
No,
Plato's
not everyone
cave,
is
all of that.
fascinated by the
It
question.
is. It's fun.
No, it isn't fun. It's boring.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. No, while I
won.
will watch Star Trek and Doctor Who, and strangely DPR watches neither one, I find philosophy just completely boring. No point of interest in it at all. I'm sorry. I'm the same way with football. I don't get it. I would rather watch the static between channels. I honestly find that more interesting.
I mean, I can see the appeal of football. It's got an element of tribalism to it. You know, it's your guys kicking the crap out of somebody else's guys. Philosophy, the main problem that I have is there is only, it's only basically the philosophy of scientific naturalism that has actually chalked up any achievement to its name. All of the others just sort of exercises in time wasting.
So I made a video, and this is kind of a call to action to everybody. There's a cancer doctor in Houston, and I won't say anything libelous here because he has really good attack lawyers. But he has produced 61 clinical trials and only ever closed one. Never been published. In 37 years, the guy has never managed to finish a clinical trial, and yet he's charging people upwards of $600,000, out of pocket, mind you, for the treatment. It's very poorly understood. He is keeping it entirely to himself, and he lives in a $6 million home, and yet they've made these movies about him, or he hired a commercial art director decided to make a movie about Dr. Stanislaw Burzynski and his miracle cancer cure. So I recommend you go to see my version of the events. But also, there is a committee for the skeptical examination, I'm not getting the name quite right, of Burzynski. And they ran a campaign basically to shame the guy into donating some money towards real cancer research, where they challenged him to match their own donations to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And I also wanted to just give Aaron a chance. I don't know if DPR messing up your scheduling here, but Aaron has a short story to share about the Burzynski Clinic.
Well,
yes, please do. Zach, I am going to remove you because, as ever, I apologise. With the last
Have a good day.
20
Thanks
minutes
for
to
having
go, suddenly everyone wants to talk to us. But thank you very much indeed for your call.
yeah, once upon a time, a year or so ago, as many of you know, my granddaughter lost her battle with leukemia. And when things were becoming desperate, of course, people will take desperate suggestions. And a number of people who are not very comfortable with skepticism had suggested the Burzynski Clinic and referred me over there. We had already done, I think, adequate examination of that of their offer and what they were arguing for and what they had on their side. And it was also about 2 days after P.Z. Myers had posted something about the Burzynski Clinic on Pharyngula, so I thanked P.Z. for speaking up the way he did. Yes, this guy basically, his plan is to inject people with urine, and somehow he convinces them that is going to cure them of cancer, and he charges a huge amount of money for this, and then he creates these videos where you have all these people claiming that they were somehow miraculously cured. But as Concordance said, when you go for the documentation, no closed trial. So how could that be? No.
To be clear, it's not urine. It is an extract of urine. It's not being synthesized from chemical sources, but it's a sodium phenylbutyrate. It was an orphan drug, was effective on certain other diseases, and so he's picked it up, relabeled it, and is making a fortune on it there in Houston. And there's just not enough evidence of effectiveness, and we want people to see our type of videos, the skeptical side of the point of view, and not just his highly promotional 100-minute Eric Merola produced video that does nothing but present him as an alternative to the weaknesses and shortcomings of conventional cancer therapy.
Yeah, the thing I'd like to bring up is how some video games, as I think, can really sort of bring about people's interest in science, that sort of thing. I mean, some, like, Minecraft, for example, if any of you ever heard of it, I'd assume that at least one of you might have heard it.
My son is addicted to it.
Well, you have a good son. Yeah, but that's what I think actually encourages a lot of critical thinking. With Minecraft, you have to, if you're going to go really advanced into it, there's basically a thing called redstone within it, and it has all sorts of different functions, and it can do lots of different things. And I just want to know if you guys think that video games in general can be a helper to, well, promote scientific thinking and critical thinking, that sort of thing.
I can tell you, my son has shown me some of the videos where the logic gates together and the note blocks, and then they use it to play music, basically in real life, or not in real life, virtually. But the amount of effort they put in always kind of depresses me when they could be using something else. It's very creative. It's, in that sense, it's positive. But I don't know how much actual science people pick up. I honestly don't know that they're using their critical thinking skills for one simple reason, and that is that the games tend to have very closed systems that only allow a certain range of actions, whereas reality is much more, and science is much more open. And I wonder if setting the wrong expectations, that answers are going to be fairly easy to figure out, gets people frustrated. And I think I've seen that in young scientists who expect science to be a matter of some parts A, some parts B equals something new. I think maybe we give the wrong perception. The same thing is true. We curse about it all the time at the place where I work, which is that CSI has set up this stupid expectation of how criminal lab science works, or how lab science in general works, where you hand somebody a piece of swab of someone's cheek and say, go sequence this, and they come back 30 seconds later, there's some cool blue lights, and they're like, here's the sequence. Well, geez, I wish it were that easy. I wish that the process were that TV friendly. But in practice, there's so much more that goes into these things, and I wonder if that sets the wrong expectation.
I mean, my reckoning is that sort of thing, ironically, video games are basically the future of education. In that, if you think about it, what do you actually want out of an education system? You want people to have useful skills by the time they emerge. And what's more, what you really want is employers want a dynamic record of what people are capable of doing. Now, at the moment, that's very poorly served, right? People basically leave college or whatever, they have some very broad and almost useless description of their abilities. Whereas if you actually sort of modularize this into skills, I mean, very much like, say, for instance, World of Warcraft, where you do things, you acquire skills, that actually then goes into a file where it's listed such that people can actually search to see if you've got certain skills. Now, I would agree with Concordance that at the moment this is largely a waste of, playing the games for education at the moment is largely a waste of time, because no one's actually put the effort into turning them into a real learning tool. You can sort of force the square brick into the round hole, but it's not very useful. Whereas if you actually had programs like this, where you can do your experiments in a Newtonian world and completely simulated, and learn about Newtonian physics that way, then that's fantastic. And if you have the courses modularized, people sort of earn the brownie points, you can actually make it into a game. People respond very well to games. In this way, I think the addictive element that a lot of the computer games industry has put a lot of effort into is something that could be very well repurposed as an if you can give that same addictiveness to learning tools, then I think that's the way forward.
It reminds me, we had Professor Philip Moriarty from Nottingham University Physics Department on the show, I think about 3 months ago, and someone called in and mentioned that there was a game you could get free download, which was basically about relativity and what would happen if the constant C changed. So again, that's a link that I'll include in the description to these videos. Concordance.
And it's a neat video. I'm the one that mentioned it. But it's not really a game for entertainment. And that's I guess what I'm kind of talking about here, is that most of the entertainment-focused games probably not teaching very accurate science. I think they're a useful educational tool, but educational games are usually not the same kind of replayability as
I was about to say,
games.
The one that always comes to my mind is there's a game called Grand Theft Auto where you sleep with the hookers to get your health back, and there's one of these great image board motivational, demotivational posters of basically a dad with his little son on his lap, and this look, son, if you beat the hooker up, you can get the money back again. And it's, the caption something like parenting, responsible parenting or something.
I have a favorite game, and it's Portal 2. Portal 2 is for my money the best game ever made, and it's the most fun because it's a puzzle game with a strong physics component. Now, I don't know that the skills that you learn in Portal 2 will necessarily be useful, but I'm holding my breath until the portal gun is invented. Because I have a lot of uses for it already. But it does make you think, and I'll say that, it probably exercises parts of your brain associated with analytical thinking. But as far as teaching a valuable skill...
By the way, Concordance, portal to the left, past the salt, okay?
What?
Okay.
Oh, portal...
salt coming through on the left, okay?
All right. I got it!
That was part of my point, that a lot of those games have heavy problem-solving components to it. Like, say, what's a good example? Any sort of game like, say, Half-Life 2, which had a fairly strong sort of puzzle element to it. And also, you're a physicist that runs around and kills aliens after accidentally ending the world. So, that kind of idealizes the physicist. But I think when it comes down to, like, as you all said, like, right now there isn't much realism in a game, and that's partially because of the technology. Because video games are still technically in their early childhood, they're still sort of trying to get everything together. I mean, once they finally release a sort of really realistic physics sort of game, I think what Thunderfoot said is right. Like, that could really be used for educational purposes.
And there's an untapped market there. If you can sell a game that kids want to play, I mean, maybe something that explores chemistry, right? You have to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a really good way to explore chemistry, but if you could come up with a game that really was entertaining and informative, there's a market for that, because, of course, parents are very willing to do this, but so would schools. But
to an extent, that technology already exists.
Sure.
There's this new computer game which I've seen where basically I think it's Nintendo, where you get to interface with a book, and it's a sort of virtual book, and you get to cast spells, and you have to do certain things to cast the spells. There is no reason whatsoever why you couldn't do a similar game, but with chemistry. But I think a lot of the problem is that there really isn't a market for this sort of thing, or let me say, the market for selling things that go under the title of education but aren't actually education is bigger than the real educational media. Just like the market, when we were talking earlier about the cancer treatment, there is a much bigger market. Well, not much bigger, but there is a significant component where people are basically selling bullshit as a cancer cure for the simple reason that having cancer cure on there is something that's marketable. Saying that it's educational is marketable, even if it's not actually educational.
If I can give an example of a game that I remember playing as a kid, it was Oregon Trail. All right, and I feel like there was some educational value there, although of course usually degenerated down into buying 1,000 boxes of bullets and just going out and shooting stuff as you go. But that kind of idea, I know our school invested in one copy for every computer that they had, and this is back when the Apple II was the state of the art, because I'm old. I'm really old. But 65 million copies of Oregon Trail have been sold, as I look up the Wikipedia article here. That's a lot of copies. Again, I think there's a big market for it. It has to be fun. It has to be something kids are actually into. But if you can merge all of that together, you can sell it to the schools and to the parents who are worried about violent video games. I think that'd be awesome.
The trouble is, Concordance, you say you're old. I'm so old that they didn't have computers when I was growing up, on which I could play a computer game.
Didn't they invent the abacus during your lifetime?
It was around that sort of time, yeah.
Okay, so on this Oregon Trail game, is there an opportunity when the snow gets too deep that you can eat the other players?
No, but they all die of cholera and dysentery. The fun thing was to give them all dumb names like Booger and, Booger all as far as I'll go. And then they show you a tombstone saying, "Here lies Booger. He died of cholera." And then you can shoot stuff. And that was always the fun part of the game.
I'm going to insist, given the time, and we should normally finish in 3 minutes. We always overrun, but I've got one more call that I'm going to try and squeeze in. So Samuel, thank you very much indeed for the call. Whilst I'm bringing him in, the point that you reminded me of was when you talked about Holocaust deniers. I don't know how many people are aware that today is, that's the 27th of January, it's the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it was on this day in 1945 that Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet troops. The reason why I wanted to mention this earlier, and I forgot, was because normally on a Sunday morning, if I need to get out of bed early for whatever reason, I turn on Radio 4, and at 8:10 in the morning, they have the Sunday service that lasts for about 40 minutes or something, and it comes live from a church or cathedral. And today's program mentioned International Holocaust Day. And the person, I don't know whether it was a priest, a bishop or whatever, invited the congregation to preach. How did he put it? I actually jotted it down. To preach for and remembrance of those that died at Auschwitz. Now, in remembrance, yes, but pray for is one of these strange things about prayer. It seems utterly redundant. I mean, what is the point of praying for people? I mean, if their belief system is correct, they're either in heaven or hell. And isn't it a little bit late to be praying for them? God sat back and allowed this to happen, but you're going to pray to the good Lord and say how wonderful He is, and ask for His thoughts to be given to these people. I mean, it just seems utterly insane.
Not only that, in many ways, Stalin was a nasty piece of work and killed more people than Hitler. Now, just because they weren't killed in mechanized death camps, does that make those deaths any less valuable?
Well, that's not who's got the greatest death toll. God committed global genocide, but he's praised for that.
Right, and
come now, DPR.
Yeah, it's not a contest, It's
that wasn't global genocide.
That was just. We got to remember.
Aaron, that wasn't global genocide. That was just God bringing all the children's souls to Him by terminating the earthly phase of life.
Oh yes,
I forgot about that. That's true.
That reminds me. There's a local Texas school that is teaching that as part of their Bible study program, that the Trail of Tears was the way that God used to bring many Indians to Christ.
Do you guys know the Trail of Tears, Thunderfoot?
That was
the displacement of Native Americans off their land and forcing them into reservations in Oklahoma. And so they relocated in Alabama and Florida and forced along this trail with no provisions, no support, just basically marched along with army guys on either side.
I don't have I know the general gist of how the Indians were killed in America. I also remember saying that in terms of absolute numbers, the number of Indians killed was comparable to the Nazi genocide.
No, much bigger. But it wasn't by the sword. They weren't in death camps. The disease that ravaged the New World or North and South America. If I'm getting the numbers wrong here, forgive me, but I think it went from 100 million in the space of 40 years. It went from 100 million people living in the Americas to 10 million people living in the Americas. So that's actually 90 million people killed, the vast majority of which were killed by disease.
Smallpox specifically.
Yeah, and ignoring the disease, there was certainly a policy. This is in many ways a thing that people need to know, and we are in our safe and stable civilization almost blind to, is that you deprive someone of food and they starve to death very quickly. And what they did frequently to the Indians is all you had to do was keep them on the move, and this meant that they couldn't get enough food for winter. And so all you had to do was sort of chase them off every now and again, and they starved to death in winter. That was it. That was actually the policy.
I had no idea that the figure was that great concordance, but as I say, given the time, rather than dwell on this topic, let's take our last caller, Stefan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Very clearly. How are you, sir?
Okay. Hi. My question is, as I wrote, what would convince you of anything supernatural? Could be God or, I don't know, homeopathy, something, anything. And I thought about it, and I can't think of anything that would convince me of anything supernatural.
I can tell you the answer. Before I come to you, Thunder, I think there's a problem here, Stefan, with the definition, because by definition, is it not the case that we can never know anything supernatural?
Sorry, say again?
Is it not, by definition alone, the fact that we can never know anything supernatural, because we can only know things about the natural world?
Yeah, that would be my point.
Right.
I can only accept natural stuff, so I can never believe in anything supernatural.
Thunder, I interrupted you.
As something supernatural is proven, it is no longer supernatural, it is then natural.
Well, for me, the answer is simple: predictive capability. If you've actually got a supernatural model that has great predictive capability, then you have a reason for believing that it's a reasonable description of reality. The problem is that such models don't have predictive capability.
You know, I can absolutely believe, for example, in aliens. I think it's actually not unlikely that there probably are aliens out there in the universe. But I'm not ready to commit to that until I see the evidence. And so to say I sort of don't believe in aliens, or I, quote, don't believe in ghosts, or, quote, don't believe in homeopathy, is to say that I have yet to be convinced that it is true. And my default position, of course, in the absence of evidence, depending on the status of the claim, is that I withhold judgment. And that's different from not believing in it, right? Like, not believing in ghosts means that I've made an assertive position that I don't think ghosts are real. I would say to you, I've never seen any evidence of ghosts, and I don't live my life in a way that ghosts are part of my daily concerns. But it's not the same as saying, I wouldn't accept it if it were demonstrated to me. And let's not get bogged down with supernatural. We all know what we're talking about here: witches and ghosts and UFOs and the supernatural, divine kind of stuff.
Quantum
I'm
magic
open to it all. I really am.
all that sort of.
I'm open to magic. I'm open to homeopathy being true. I'm open to Burzynski's cure, which is a well-known orphan drug. So it's nothing particularly magical about it. But all of these claims, all of these things that I am, if you will, in the default skeptical position on, all that I lack is adequate evidence. And I think the best evidence, if I can, is when a skeptical person conducts the test, the results are the same as when a non-skeptical person conducts the test. So I think, what do they call it? Observer independence is one of the most fundamental properties of good evidence. That is, no matter who does it, where they are in the world, that we can test it and get the same results. At that point, you have to start examining the models that you're using and saying, here's a phenomenon which is an anomaly, which cannot be explained. Now, that's not the end of the process, but that is certainly the beginning of the process. So if strong evidence can be brought forward that UFOs are visiting the Earth, it would be a real jerk who wouldn't examine that evidence, give it a fair hearing, and decide whether or not it's reasonable. You can't dismiss anything completely out of hand. On the other hand, I don't endorse things until the case has been made.
But in order for you to say that there are no extraterrestrial reptiles running our government, or that you don't believe that, I mean, you just make an excuse that you haven't seen the evidence, but you would have to know all things about all things before you could know enough to say that there's no reptiles running the government. Obviously, I'm doing a parody of an argument that we often hear about God.
Yeah, no, it's true. I can't definitively say that they aren't there.
Everything you said now is like you would only accept, for example, concordance, natural stuff to be that explains it. And maybe I just don't get it. I don't get the supernatural stuff, but don't they claim that it's some being supernatural that is apart from the natural world?
Yes.
So how can we ever prove that?
Stuff. I don't think it's a very potent argument, because it boils down to semantics. When things are observable and testable in the natural world that we occupy, then they become natural phenomena, and we can observe and test those. Now, whether or not they have a supernatural cause is a question for, I don't know, a philosopher, maybe a particle physicist, but I don't want to get bogged down in that aspect of the argument, that, you know, a supernatural phenomenon can't affect the natural world. But okay, maybe it does. Whatever, we're open to that. Let's see what we can measure. Let's see what we can test. And if it's testable, then of course it becomes part of the natural world at that point, and we say, aha, ESP, right? There's no reason why ESP can't be a natural process that somehow arises from the brain using some mechanism we don't understand. And I'm scared enough of, say, quantum physics, particle physics, to shy away from things like, well, that doesn't seem very likely to me, or, you know, Newton's laws of motion or the laws of thermodynamics forbid that kind of thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to dismiss things out of hand, but I am going to apply a greater degree of skepticism to assertions which are not consistent with models which have proven the test of time. So if you tell me you have, for example, what do they call it, eternal motion machine, what's the word? Perpetual motion machine. I'm going to say you're going to have a lot of proving to do, Buster, because that would involve overturning things which have been in effect and have never been falsified in 600 years. So you better A, be a genius, and B, have some doggone good proof. But that's something that we might call paranormal, or we might call supernatural if we like. Just something that doesn't fit with the natural order. So don't get bogged down in the semantics.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stefan, for the call. It's now 10 minutes after we should normally close. I've got a few thank yous to make, and then I will go through everyone on the panel for their final words. I'd like to remind people that these videos, or this show, will be posted on YouTube. Normally it's within about 48 hours. An audio file will also be available on iTunes. I do not do that. Someone else does that for me because I'm far too incompetent to be able to do that. So A link to that will be included in the video descriptions and also on our webpage, www.magicsandwichshow.com, from which you can also get information and news about forthcoming events and all of the previous shows we've done. I think about the last 18 months or so shows are also on there. I'd like to thank Ben, who's been working behind the scenes today instead of Tony. Thank you very much, Ben, for your help. Remind people, firstly, that Thunder is looking for a name for his video competition. I'll leave him to explain a little bit more about that and where you can send your ideas for that. Finally, at the beginning of the show, if you were not here, I mentioned the free Ben Baz campaign that is going on. Ben Baz is someone who has been arrested in Kuwait and is facing trial in Kuwait on charges of blasphemy. Again, links to that will be included in the video description, and if you are listening to this subsequently on iTunes, if you go to our webpage, then that information will be there as well. Finally, Seth Andrews' book, which is currently linked above the, or linked to it is above the comment section on Blog TV. Check that out, and again, a link to that will be included both on the YouTube descriptions and also on our webpage. That's me done. Thank you everyone for coming along. Final words. Should we take it alphabetically? All right.
All right, thanks. Earlier in this show, there was somebody that was texting messages to me wanting to, I guess, effectively waste my time debating me on Skype. He was saying that that we just gang up on Christians that come here. Well, there's four of us. We all have questions. We're all eager to respond. I told him that I would easily, happily, one-on-one with him if he wanted, because we've done that before, and people don't take that bait to do a recorded call. I like people to be accountable. So, of course, that person, if I'm going to have my face on the camera and you know my identity, I'm going to be talking to a real person who, when I prove them wrong, will have to admit that, yes, they are wrong. The only way that you can have that kind of accountability is when you have an identity, and so this person currently calling himself Broski1990 is telling me that my logic is fouled because he wants to have a debate with me wherein he remains completely anonymous and gets to say whatever he wants and doesn't have to be held accountable for anything I prove him wrong about. He told me that I'm using a cop-out. I just wanted to throw that out there to see if anybody would waste their time doing a public debate against somebody who won't even admit who he is. I think that he's obviously the one doing the cop-out. Anyway, last words. Sorry, I had that steaming on me for a little while. I am going to be at the North Texas Secular Convention at the University of Texas on the 8th and 10th of February. There's going to be a good convention of Mr. Deity's going to be there, a whole bunch of other people, and that's all I'm going to plug at the moment, and I'm done.
If my recollection of the alphabet is correct, concordance next.
Okay, so I've already announced discussion with PZ and the Skeptical Heretic and moderated by the True Puka. I think that'll be interesting. It will be a discussion. Don't come if you're expecting don't come if you're expecting me to try to gut slam somebody in the discussion. I think it's something that we need to kind of have out, discuss, open up the issues, and have a conversation about it. On that line, I also am going to be doing a video.
Do you want to remind us of the date and venue again?
I'm sorry, that is February 2nd, which I believe is next Saturday. The True Puka channel has some more details. We're still kind of working out the final bits. And again, we're not 100% sure PZ is going to show. We'll see.
Well,
but we'll probably still have the discussion.
I would just add on this, we discussed earlier the problems with dogmatic positions, but just asserting that you're right and cutting off yourself from all other lines of criticism.
Well, we'll have a discussion. And then the other thing, I'm going to be probably working on a video that I didn't really want to make, and that's about gun control. And I know that discussion has happened here as well, but I won't bill myself as a completely neutral party. But I will say that I can understand some points on both sides. But there are some arguments I think that just have to be thrown out, and that'll probably be the first video. There'll be a second volume that will talk about what issues I do think need to be discussed, and I think it's an important time in our history where we have a chance, at least in the U.S., to discuss these things and see what comes out of them.
Well, I think whether you like it or not, these issues are going to be discussed, given what Obama has said publicly recently. But anyway, let's leave that for now. Thunderfoot.
Yes, I'd just like to announce that there's going to be a video contest, which hopefully I'm going to announce in video form at the end of this week. The first round will run for the next 3 months, or it's actually 2 months now, because I'm late getting the video out. The judge will be Eugenie Scott. The first prize will be $1,000. Second prize $500. There'll be 2 prizes of $250. The third prize of $250. So if you think that you can make good videos on YouTube, we want you for this competition. Plus, you get to get your video watched by Eugenie Scott. So you're on that bombshell. Well, one final thing. We will be back with you in 2 weeks' time at the same time. As I say, if you want details of the show, do remember they're all contained on our website. Links to which will be in the description. And if our first caller is true to her word, she will be back with us in 2 weeks' time. She was Daniela, who had once been an atheist who had converted to Christianity on evidence that she didn't feel comfortable telling us about during the course of this show, but which she said she may well be able to be in a position to tell us about on the next show. So that will be something worth looking forward to.
As soon as she figures out what it is.
Yes, well, she's got 2 weeks to do that. And anyway, on that note, thank you very much, everyone, indeed, that's come along. Thank you for all the callers, and apart from 1 or 2 people that were in the chat, thank you everyone who was contributing to the conversation in the chat. Take care. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time.